So there are some big questions that we need to talk about for doing research in test design. And the first question that I think is important to bring up is this notion of what's the way that you're going about calibrating a test. And the way you go about calibrating a test just means that you're going out and you're taking a group of items, you're testing them to make sure that they measure the traits that you think they're measuring and that they act in the way that you predict, and then you're eliminating the items that don't work well. You're eliminating the bad information from your test calibration process. So the calibration process really just refers to that. You'll see it used in the literature a lot. How did this test get calibrated? What was the method that the researchers went about doing the calibration work? And there are a couple of big questions that we ask related to how did you calibrate that test? And those questions are kind of listed there for you. These should be really familiar based on your tutorial. The things we're talking about now should start to be coming a little bit more core to the big ideas, and that should start to be kind of evident as we talk through this. So if you have questions about any of this, again, just send me an email and let's clear it up, because I want to make sure that these kind of big picture ideas are not lost as we move through this introduction to item response theory. So some central questions and processes in the testing research and in the validation of various tests and measures are the development. So we want to know, are the testing constructs socially valid? And do the items correspond to those constructs? So if I look at my items, do they add up to and do they measure up to what I think I'm measuring? And is there social validity with that? Can I look at it and say, yeah, that looks a lot like what I think it would be measuring? And that is something that researchers work heavily on. We want to make sure that the constructs are actually real constructs, that they exist theoretically, and we want to make sure that those items that we have on the test correspond to those constructs. Next thing we become really curious in is the item testing. Do the items behave reasonably? And when we're testing an item, does it actually act the way we think it should act? What if it doesn't? What if we find out an item fails? What if we find out it has no relationship to what we think we're measuring? So you want to investigate your items carefully as a part of the calibration process. The next thing that we think about is, after we go through and check our items, we want to be able to put them onto forms. And what we mean by forms is, can we put a group of items onto a form and get meaningful information? So can we take a piece of the test, all of the items that have been tested, and grab a sample of those and then have a form of that test? So form development is something that's used a lot in large scale and high stakes assessment, because you don't want to give every test taker the same exact form. So think of the SATs, for instance. It's given in multiple forms at multiple administrations across the country, and it's the process of form development that we know that it will work correctly, or at least it's alleged to work correctly. I suppose that's kind of a political question as to whether or not the SATs actually work, but in theory they're working. So then the next thing we ask is related to benchmarking. So after we've developed these tests, and then we've gone and measured to make sure that the items are working, and then we've put something onto a form and we know that we have some sort of final product of a test, we want to know, how can we classify groups of test takers into various ability categories? And that's really the process of benchmarking. So in benchmarking, you see that on high stakes assessment, people are often categorized into not proficient, proficient, above proficient, or not proficient, close to proficient, proficient, above proficient. Those are some pretty common ones that we see. So when a group of test items are selected, we call that a calibration. We call that group of items is then working correctly. We know that they function right, and then we administer them in their form. That is how it works. So the process of calibration is really essential, because the process of calibration is based on reliability and validity, and we're going to certainly be taking a look at some reliability and validity data.